Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash by Rabbi Immanuel Bernstein, part of our collective Journeys in Torah. Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash. I'm Steve Geller. The beauty of our Holy Torah is endless, but that beauty is not only seen in the Tanakh and the Talmud, it's also in how Chazal conducts their own commentary. And Rabbi Bernstein has a spectacular example of that here. The beginning of our parsha relates how Yaakov, before starting out on his journey toward Haran, retired for the night at the site of the future Beis HaMikdash. Before going to sleep, he took a number of stones and placed them around his head. Rashi explains that he did so as protection from wild animals. Rashi then cites a well-known tradition from our sages that the stones began to quarrel among themselves, with each one wanting to be the one upon which the tzaddik would rest his head. A miracle then occurred whereby all the stones merged into one stone. That's the story we learn each year, but let's slow down a little and look at several questions that can be raised on this scene, just from focusing on the wording itself. For example, if Yaakov placed the stones around his head for protection, what is the meaning of each stone then wanting to be the one placed under his head? And how are we to understand inanimate objects like stones expressing their desire that a tzaddik should rest his head upon them? And what is the significance of all the stones becoming one? Well, before we start, the Gemara in Chulin points to a contradiction between two psukim. The first pasuk states that he took from the stones, me'avnei hamakom. And the later pasuk states, es ha'even, he took the stone. Rabbi Yitzchak says this teaches that all the stones gather together to one place, with each one saying, let the tzaddik rest his head on me. It was taught in a brisa that they all became absorbed as one stone. So the Gemara's discussion focuses on a basic contradiction between two psukim. The first where he took me'avnei hamakom, from the stones of the place, and later when he woke up and took es ha'even, the stone. Chazal's tradition of the quarrel amongst the stones coming as the resolution of that contradiction. Tosfos, in their commentary to the above-mentioned Gemara about there initially being several stones, make a somewhat shocking comment. Lefi pshuto, on a straightforward level, one can explain the pasuk as saying that he took one stone from among the stones of the place. Tosfos are alerting us to the fact that the first pasuk does not state that Yaakov took stones of the place, but rather me'avnei hamakom, from the stones of the place. How many stones of the place did Yaakov take? The pasuk doesn't say. It could be one, or it could be several. According to Tosfos, when the second pasuk states that he took ha'even, the stone, now we know that initially he only took one of the stones that were there. In this sense, the second pasuk does not contradict the first pasuk, it actually clarifies it. In technical terms, we're in a pickle. On the one hand, Tosfos points out that it seems clear that the two psukim don't have to contradict each other. But on the other hand, what exactly does Tosfos mean to say by this? Because the Gemara does pose them as a contradiction. Tosfos are a commentary on the Gemara, not on the Torah's pasuk. How do their words here add to our understanding of the Gemara when they seem to be undermining it? Well, now, my friends, focus here for a minute. The answer to our question lies in Tosfos' opening words. Lefi pshuto, on a simple, straightforward level. In order to understand the significance of these words, we have to recognize two concepts which run throughout the entire Torah, known as pshot and drash. We're used to seeing these two terms when learning differing ways of interpreting a pasuk. Pshot explains the pasuk in terms of what can be derived from the words using language, syntax, and grammar. Drash explains and expounds the pasuk using a broader spectrum of meaning, including connections to other ideas, as well as more color and detail relating to that situation known to the sages through tradition. However, it's important to note that pshot and drash differ not only in terms of the interpretations they provide, but also in terms of the issues that they raise that then require interpretation. Pshat derives from the word pashut, which means simple or straightforward. The goal of pshat is to read the pasuk in a straightforward way, letting the meaning of the words emerge. Drash derives from the word lidrosh, which means to seek. Drash seeks a resolution of aspects of the pasuk beyond that which the pshat either provides or requires. It pays attention to details which do not prevent a straightforward understanding, but which nevertheless require a more detailed resolution. Or put another way, pshat analyzes the pasuk while drash scrutinizes it. An example of these two approaches is in our pasuk. As Tosfos point out, on a pshat level, the pasuk does not indicate that Yaakov took more than one stone. And with this, Tosfos do not mean to negate the Gemara's contradiction. They purely mean to establish that it is not a product of basic pshot, but of more colorful drash. And what's the color? Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mizrahi explains that the Gemara is bothered by the Torah mentioning that Yaakov took me'avnei hamakom, from the stones of the place. If indeed Yaakov only took one of those stones, why is this detail mentioned? Would we have thought that he took the stone from somewhere else? The pasuk should have stated merely, Vayikach Evan, he took a stone. And this would be similar to what we find in the pasuk at the end of Parshas B'Shalach, describing the war with Amalek, which states that when Moshe began to tire from raising his arms, Vayikchu Evan, they took a stone from nearby for him to sit on. If our pasuk adds that there were stones there, me'avnei, it's to indicate that he took a number of them. But if so, then this leads to a contradiction with the later pasuk, which refers to only one stone. This is a classic drash approach to words of the Torah, and obviously it's the approach taken throughout the Gemara, not only in the halachic sections of the Torah, but also in the narrative sections. And so, Tosfos' comment has led us to a deeper appreciation of the Gemara's discussion. However, it now leads us to a new question. How did a discussion of this nature wind up in Rashi's commentary on the Torah? And this is a much bigger question than we might think. Why do we ask? Let's take a look at the words of Rashi himself describing the purpose of his commentary. I have come only to address the pshot of the pasuk and the Haggadah, which resolves the words of the pasuk. In other words, Rashi's relationship with pshot and drash in his commentary depends on whether we're dealing with questions or answers. In terms of the answers that Rashi gives, he is prepared to use both pshot, ideally, and drash if necessary. But in terms of the questions that he addresses, Rashi will only deal with issues in understanding pshot. With this background, we can now ask, given that the Gemara's discussion is generated by a question of drash, with the number of rocks taken, not pshot, why does Rashi deal with it in his commentary? As we saw, the Gemara saw a contradiction based on the tension between the plural me'avnei at the beginning of the pasuk and the singular evan at the end. Exactly which of these two terms does Rashi quote as the headline for his comment? Well, the answer is neither of them. In order to understand why Rashi addresses a question of drash when he only addresses questions of pshat, we need to look at his comment on the pasuk from the beginning. And by the beginning, Rabbi Bernstein means not to Rashi's own opening words, but to the part of the pasuk which he quotes as the headline for his comment. Rashi always introduces his commentary by first telling us the words or phrase his commentary is edifying. Unlike the Gemara, it is not dealing with me'avnei in the first pasuk and evan in the second. The headline of Rashi's comment is on the phrase in our pasuk, Vayasa me'reshosav, and he placed them around his head. In doing so, Rashi brilliantly indicates that the notion that Yaakov initially took numerous stones emerges from reading this phrase on a pshat level. How so? First, the word me'reshosav is written in the plural. Certain commentators of Rashi put the question bluntly, how many heads does Yaakov have? Given that he only has one, why is the plural used? It's clearly to indicate that he placed whatever he took at different sides of his head. And if this is so, then it means he took more than one rock. Even if we take a milder approach and say that the plural form doesn't necessarily denote different sides of his head, but simply means by his head, this too will lead us to the conclusion that he took numerous stones. Presumably, whatever he put by his head was for protection, which would not be afforded to him by one stone, but rather by numerous stones surrounding his head. My friends, this is a rare and beautiful situation. While we generally don't expect that an issue raised by drash will be the same as one raised by pshat, in our case it is, with the difference being, for the Gemara, a drash flag was raised as soon as we encounter the phrase me'avnei hamakom. Rashi notes that a pshat flag is raised very soon after when we meet the phrase Vayasa me'reshosav. And so our pasuk becomes a setting for unity, not only merging of different stones into one stone, but also for merging of the worlds of pshat and drash into one discussion. Just a beautiful journey orchestrated by Rabbi Bernstein.